cloud isn't one size fits all. And it really changes depending on what you're running, what you're looking for. And something that we said earlier of you have to look inward. You have to figure out what you want to accomplish, what you're running, what your real goals are before you can make a decision like this. Cloud provider is right for JD Edwards, AWS, Azure, and Oracle Cloud. Are you choosing based on a real strategy or just what your competitors are doing? Today on Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards, I sit down with cloud expert Stuart Peterman to help you confidently navigate public cloud choices for ERP. By the end, you'll have a decision making framework that protects performance, cost, and compliance. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards. I'm your host, Nate Bushfield, and this episode is a must listen if you're even thinking about moving JD Edwards to the cloud. Public cloud decisions are high stakes. Pick wrong, and you can be stuck with poor performance or even unexpected costs. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Stuart Peterman, Enterprise Cloud Executive at ERP Suites. Stuart has helped organizations across industries find the right home for ERP workloads, balancing performance, cost efficiency, and compliance. So, Stu, welcome. First off, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's great to be back. Thanks again, Nate.
Yes, the first reoccurring guest that we've had on the pod so far.
I'm
Got to
honored.
get you a nice little hat or a jacket. I'm not sure which way we're gonna go. Maybe we'll be like the SNL, like you'll get a jacket with a number on it. Who's
Ooh.
to say? But for those of you who have not met you yet, can you share a bit about your background and what brought you into the world of cloud and JD Edwards?
Yeah, absolutely. From the beginning, my entire career has been centered around things being hosted in the cloud. My first couple of companies I worked for were both cloud native applications. I spent quite a bit of time at Salesforce and then moved on to NetSuite for a period of time. But since moving over into the JD Edwards ecosystem, my work has been primarily around getting on-premise customers into the public cloud, whether that be Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, Amazon Web Services, or Microsoft Azure. Those are the primary three that I've really helped customers migrate over to. But now I'm here. I am happy to be the only recurring guest. It's certainly a point of pride, and I am actually now looking forward to the jacket. So if I don't get it, I will be disappointed.
Well, I can't promise anything. It might just be a pin. Who's to say? I'm sure we'll get there one day. But let's get right into it. With so many options out there, picking a cloud platform can feel like a spinning wheel, you know? What do you think so many companies feel stuck or overwhelmed when trying to pick a cloud provider for JD Edwards?
Yeah, I mean, really, it is not a straightforward set of products, services, or even platforms as a whole. It is very difficult to understand, especially when you dive into each individual cloud platform, what they offer, what they will cost, what will be impacted from a, let's say, a throughput or latency perspective. So I don't blame any company for being confused and thinking, how do I even approach this? Which, is one reason why I would say us as an organization are in business. I think we offer unique insight, and that's why people like myself and Charles Anderson can weigh in on those things and help companies understand objectively where their workloads fit best from every single standpoint.
Yeah. And Charles Anderson, obviously a well-known player in this space, all-knowing being some call him into this company. So definitely a great reference there. But what are a few of the most common mistakes or misconceptions you see when companies approach the decision?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, although I feel very strongly that this should not be your primary concern, is cost. How do you even understand what you will pay in a particular cloud platform? Um, there are certain platforms that are much more straightforward in their cost than others. I think if we're talking about an objective comparison here, I think OCI's cost is far more upfront and straightforward. You can go on their website and actually plug in the various sizing criteria, CPU, memory, and things like that, and find out exactly what it's going to cost you, or at least with a you know plus minus deviation that is pretty minimal. But when you jump into a cloud platform as mature and advanced as AWS, you can run into three different subsets: EC2, Lambda, ECS, and then within that you have a million different pricing schemes within each one. So it can be extremely difficult to understand. And that's not even talking about, let's say I exceed a certain threshold that I was not supposed to, or my data egress is past the acceptable balance for the month that I'm in. It can be extremely daunting for a company. Then, of course, you have everything from the performance or integration of third party applications. All of those things make up an extremely complicated ecosystem. And it's hard enough to understand that within the context of your own organization, let alone what it's going to look like within a public cloud platform that you're not as familiar with.
Right. And I will say, coming from Indiana University, we love when people are never daunted, and that's the main thing that we care about is never being daunted.
Always
It's
working that in, huh?
Yeah, you have to work it in. I mean, come on. But when cloud decisions go sideways, what kind of problems typically show up first?
Yeah, and I'll kind of talk out of both sides of my mouth here, unfortunately. But the first thing that I typically see, despite this being my strong opinion that this should never be your primary concern, is the first thing I see it hit is a company's pocketbook. Um, if you don't fully understand the restrictions that a particular cloud platform may have, and I mentioned a few of them earlier, one of them being data egress. If you are a company that your ingress egress is higher than average, you may actually get hit with pretty significant fees. Or let's say on a particular month, you have a lot of incoming or outbound traffic, you may actually get a pretty hefty bill at the end of that month. So understanding what sort of restrictions, and then when it comes to things like higher performance needs, those companies could potentially hit you with an overage fee that might make your eyes water by the end of the month. The second one is usually around security. So, you know, when it comes to public cloud platforms, they all tout a shared responsibility model. And some companies don't always understand where the cloud's responsibility on security ends and theirs begins. So there can be gaps, and that can take the form of things like, misconfigured access controls or maybe exposed data. Um, and that can be a huge concern for companies. So it's really, really important for them to understand where that shared responsibility model ends. Um, the next we would see is typically performance. If not configured correctly, you can experience stuff like latency, I don't know, misconfigured load balancers, under provisioned services, and that can affect performance. So the last thing you want is for your end users, when you migrate to a public cloud, to start to say, wow, this is very slow and I can't run the reports that I need to run, right? This takes 15 seconds longer than it took before. Really, the goal of any organization should be that their end users don't know the difference between their on-prem setup and a public cloud migration. And then the last that I'll typically run into is stuff with integrations. Integration failures can be a huge deal with an organization. Sometimes companies have legacy applications that they don't know how well they'll play in the cloud, or maybe they don't realize how systems are going to kind of talk to each other in the public cloud. So they're hit with unexpected surprises, and those are very unwelcome surprises when it comes to integration of third-party applications that are pivotal to a business's everyday sort of functions.
Yeah. Jeez. I never really thought of it like that. Obviously, the pocketbook, everybody really thinks about that, but going a little bit past it, I mean, geez, there's a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of reasons why people would really be scared to move to the cloud or move to a certain cloud provider. So thank you for breaking that down a little bit.
Yeah.
But to break down something else for our listeners, it's not just about brand names. Each cloud has its own strengths. So when you're evaluating AWS, Azure, and Oracle Cloud, what are the key technical or even strategic criteria you look for?
Yeah, well, Nate, I could dive into this and talk about it for hours on end, but I know this is a limited amount of time we have on this podcast, so I'll keep it fairly simple. You know, first and foremost, as a company, and like you mentioned earlier, you need to understand and assess your own internal workloads. Some workloads just perform better or make more sense in one cloud platform over another. And that can be because of the pricing model, it can be because of the ecosystem capabilities of that particular platform. It can even get down to things like the architecture of those specific workloads or maybe compliance needs that you have as an organization. So, if we're talking at a high level here, OCI, in short, is optimized for running Oracle database. It's optimized for running Oracle workloads. It also has really, really advantageous data egress policies. I believe they're 10 terabytes per month for free versus the other two, which is 100 gigs per month. Um, but Windows works really well, or .NET workloads. They have a deeper native support on Azure. So, when you're looking at those, you're looking at your workloads as a company, you need to assess, okay, I am a heavily licensed Microsoft shop. That should play into your decision making when you're looking at a public cloud. Um, it's also worth noting that Windows has a really strong hybrid cloud offering. Things like Azure Arc, those are really advantageous for a company that wants to approach it either in phases, which would require a hybrid cloud approach, or they will be hybrid forever because of security and compliance needs. Um, AWS, everyone knows, it has the largest and most mature ecosystem on the public cloud market. Their third-party integration capabilities are extremely strong. They also are really, really good from the app development perspective. So like things like Lambda or I think DynamoDB, container tooling, all of those things are best in class services. So when you're a company looking at what you should do from a public cloud perspective, it is very important to look inward first, assess your own internal ecosystem, your own internal workloads, and then say, okay, well, these fit better with this particular platform, but these may fit better with a different. And in those cases, you can even look into potentially hosting on two different platforms. I know Oracle and Windows have an extremely strong partnership that they've developed over the past few years. So those things are also possible. But it's a really complicated discussion for you to have with your own internal staff, your team, and it's something you should never take lightly. You should really consider it before you make a move, and it should never be because you want to quote unquote just modernize. It also should
Mhm.
never be just because you want to save money. So it's a multifaceted approach.
Yeah, no matter what direction you go, you got to make sure that it lines up with what you really need. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, that's all we can really say for our customers is to make sure that they're making the right move for them. But how do these platforms stack up in areas like ERP workload optimizations, cost transparency, data transfer fees, and even support for automation or AI?
Yeah. So, I covered a little bit of it already, but
Hmm.
I'll talk about it in a little more detail. From data transfer fees, this is no bias. We're making an objective comparison. The key winner in that argument is Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. With their data egress fees, you know, you will just be much better off from an ingress egress perspective. They also, I believe, have, if it's in the same availability domain. So let's say those egress transactions are happening in Ashburn, Virginia, and only in Ashburn, or I don't know, only in San Jose. There is no cost tied to that. So it's very clear that Oracle has made very strong pricing concessions in order to steal market share away from the other two, who are the bigger players in the space, and frankly, don't have to make the same concessions. So it's not always the best fit to go to OCI, but if you're looking at it from a pricing standpoint, OCI typically has much more advantageous pricing. Also, from the compute and storage side of things, it's much, much cheaper to go to OCI. Um, but from a from a workload optimization perspective, a lot of it also has to do with the database that you're running on. Database plays a huge role within whether you should migrate to a specific cloud platform or not. Whether you're on Oracle database, SQL Server database, or maybe you're running JD Edwards on like IBM DB2. That will also play a huge factor in where you should go, if anywhere at all. Um, so from that standpoint, Oracle is kind of the clear winner from a data ingress egress sort of
Mhm.
perspective. From a cost transparency perspective, I would also say, and not to sound biased, but Oracle is more transparent from that perspective, although it's not for lack of effort that AWS is not transparent. It's just they have the most complex offering. How can you be as simple as an OCI when even from the start, you have to choose between ECS, EC2, and Lambda, and then all those things have completely different pricing structures within them. Um, so, although AWS may be less transparent, they do have a more broad and complex offering. So, there are give and takes on each side.
Right, exactly. And at the end of the day, I know you want to seem not as biased, and you're not seeming biased at all. Don't worry about that.
Thank
But
you.
we're just trying to give the actual facts and the actual information. And at the end of the day, like, if it is more complex, it's not that it's less transparent. It just might be a little bit harder to really find what you're looking for in terms of cost, in terms of data transfer fees, in terms of automation. So the more straightforward you can be, I mean, and the more straightforward a company is, it's just going to be easier for the common person to really understand what they're going to get from some of these cloud offerings. But what's different when JD Edwards is in the mix versus other enterprise systems?
Yeah, that's another one that I'm gonna have to try to keep fairly concise and short because JD Edwards is, it's a very mature ERP system. It has been in the market for a really long time. And with that comes really deep industry specific functionality. It also comes with high customizations. There are companies that have customized their JD Edwards to where it does not look anything like a modern JD Edwards environment. Um, and that can cause a lot of potential problems if you are then trying to migrate to the cloud. A big strategy I've seen a lot lately is because of the high customized nature of some people's JD Edwards environment, they choose to go back to vanilla. And that is a really cool, interesting, and strong approach to a cloud migration as well. Um, because whereas a lot of companies have those customizations that help them get their everyday jobs done, the newer versions or the newer editions, tools releases of JD Edwards have things like UDOs or UDOs. I don't want to upset anyone in the JD Edwards community, or orchestrations. Orchestrations can take 45 click processes down to 3 click processes, and there are a lot of people at ERP suites that know a lot of firsthand use cases where they've done those things. Whereas before that, there were spider webs of custom configurations that would usually do that for an organization. So it's interesting to see how JD Edwards has evolved, and of course, that has a huge impact on what public cloud platform you would choose, if any at all. If it's a hybrid approach, if it's two separate clouds. So those things are huge considerations when you're talking about your JD Edwards in the cloud, but also the database. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the database that you currently run has a huge impact on what you would do. I mean, it can cause you to have to replatform in some cases, which is a much more complicated process. So whether you're on Oracle database, which obviously would run better in the Oracle cloud, or SQL Server database, which you know actually, based on the Oracle and Microsoft partnership, does run pretty well in the Oracle cloud as well. But um, you traditionally would work better in Microsoft Azure, and then you have IBM DB2, which would require a total replatform. So, um, you know, if you're running off of an IBM box, that is something that you would absolutely have to do. So whether you're running on one versus the other totally changes your approach.
Exactly. Cloud isn't one size fits all.
That's right.
And it really changes depending on what you're running, what you're looking for. And something that we said earlier of you have to look inward. You have to
Mhm.
figure out what you want to accomplish, what you're running, what your real goals are before you can make a decision like this. We also had Mo on the pod not too long ago talking about automations. He's definitely one of those people that knows orchestrations more than anyone else, at least in this industry. But
Yeah.
speaking of industry, let's talk about how industry context shapes cloud strategy. So, what trends are you seeing in cloud adoption by industry, like, say, manufacturing versus like healthcare versus retail?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. You know, I have to say I do quite a bit of market research, but a lot of what I talk about is based on my personal experience. Um, we'll start with, let's say, financial services. So from financial services, I kind of see medium to high adoption. They're a bit cautious within that industry. I'm seeing a lot of hybrid deployments because of course, a lot of those financial institutions have regulations that they are, uh, you know, very concerned with on a day-to-day basis. So, they will, in some cases, keep their, um, core financial systems on premise, but let's say move some other applications into the cloud or other workloads into the cloud. Um, let's see, healthcare, it's kind of medium. Uh, again, cautious, similar to financial services. Medium mainly due to the telehealth craze. A lot of people are,
Oh,
using apps now to get
yeah.
prescriptions. So they have to then have cloud-based infrastructure to some degree. But then, of course, they're cautious because HIPAA compliance is pretty stringent.
Mhm.
Data privacy within the healthcare space is very stringent. You need to make sure that that core data does not ever get risk to be exposed to any
Yeah.
potential malicious actors. Um, if we're talking about manufacturing, which, if we're talking JD Edwards, we're talking manufacturing, uh,
Yeah.
it's growing really quickly. And that's mainly due to the need for stuff like Internet of Things and predictive maintenance for those big machines that are manufacturing those tiny little widgets that are being put in a box and sent to you. Um, some of the supply chain optimization solutions in the public cloud are also really strong. So a lot of manufacturing companies are looking to gain that little edge versus their competition. And not in all, but in some cases, manufacturing companies also are operating on thinner margins. So if they can get a little bit more out of those that profit margin, and they can eke out a little bit more based on a little more efficiency, they're looking into that because they're doing it at massive scale. Um, we're talking stuff like retail and e-commerce. You know, retail and e-commerce is highly cloud native. So, you know, most of the e-commerce systems are cloud native at this stage in development. Um, there are also really strong needs from e-commerce companies based on seasonal buying habits. Black Friday, your company is going to get 50 times the revenue and therefore need 50 times the infrastructure capability on that particular day or week. Um, and then I guess if we're talking, let's say, like technology and SaaS,
Right.
obviously that is going to be very highly cloud native. So those companies, their cloud adoption is and has always been of kind of a high leading sort of nature.
Of course, really appreciate your insight there. But how do things like regulatory compliance, legacy infrastructure, even hybrid needs factor into cloud selection?
Yeah. So I guess if we're talking about um, a hybrid sort of conversation that you and your company are having internally, um, there are a lot of different reasons why that might be the case. I've talked already about maybe some government compliance concerns, but there are others. Let's say you don't want to go all in on public cloud, but you still want to modernize to some degree, and maybe that's because you don't have the budget to go, full on into the public cloud at this stage, or maybe you want the flexibility of certain public cloud services and products for certain workloads, but you still want the control and then the performance of your on-prem infrastructure. You may want to look into a hybrid cloud sort of setup, and there is a lot of consideration that goes into that as well. I mean, if you can imagine everything that we talked about so far, imagine you're not even just dealing with one specific public cloud provider, you're dealing with two, or you're dealing with your on-prem infrastructure and a public cloud provider. There's a lot that goes into that. So there's a lot that you really need to consider there. Um, but then, of course, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, you're in healthcare, or you're in finance, or you have government contracts or affiliations with your organization. That may be another big reason why you want to keep some of those, let's say, core financial systems on premise and then migrate maybe analytics or customer applications over into the cloud. So, it is a very complicated discussion. It's really good to have it early and often, and it's good to understand why that might be um, something that could hinder or help your ability to go into the public cloud. And it's good to have someone in your organization or even someone outside of your organization that can help you look more deeply into that from an internal perspective.
Right. Well, I really do appreciate you coming on, Stu. I mean, a lot of this stuff even sends me for a loop, especially when you're talking about cloud. I mean, that's a little bit of the out of the realm for me. But if you're listening to this and thinking we need to revisit our cloud strategy, now's a great time to do it. Head over to erpsuites.com and take the free cloud assessment. It'll help you figure out which provider aligns best with your business and ERP goals. Or just reach out. Stu and the rest of the ERP Suites team would love to help you get it right the first time. But that's a wrap for this episode of Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards. Huge shout out to Stu for joining us and sharing so many insights. If this helped clarify your cloud thinking, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your leadership team or IT group. Until next time, ask smart questions, challenge the status quo, and keep pushing JD Edwards into the future.